Hi and welcome to another very exciting tutorial in our 24 days of Swift tutorials series. Today is day 2 of our to-do application, and the topics that we're dealing with today is creating a prototype UI. We're going to cover the design pattern of delegation and also how to use custom UITableViewCells. And this is the prototype UI that we're going to build, and also we are going to include the features that are listed here, like saving to-dos, loading them, delete them, and also mark them as completed. And we have already created the necessary class and structs for the data model in the last tutorial, so definitely check that one out. We're going to, this tutorial is going to take about 30 minutes to create the complete prototype UI and implement all of these features. So this is what we're doing today. And before we get started, let me just give you a quick reminder about the Slack community that I've created for this channel. Attending or joining is absolutely free. You can use the join link in the video description below, and this is just a great place and has become already a great place for your questions and where we all can help each other out. So, as I said, we're going to talk about the prototype UI today and also delegation and custom table view cells. And since delegation or delegates are a little bit intriguing if you are not familiar with them, let me give you a very quick introduction into what a delegate really is. And a delegate is actually an object that acts on behalf of or in coordination with another object when the object encounters an event in your application. And this delegate is often responding to a user event or is at least asked to interpret the event in an app-specific manner. So let's have a quick look at how this is designed. And the design of the delegation mechanism is really simple. So you start, the delegating class that we're talking about, like a table view, has usually a property that is usually also named delegate. So if we're creating our own class that uses delegation, we'll have to create a delegate property. And what we are also doing is declaring many functions, as many as we actually need to constitute a protocol. And we're actually just declaring these functions without implementing them. So these are one or more functions that constitute the protocol that we're implementing. And the functions of the protocol mark significant events handled or anticipated by the delegating object. So this object wants either to communicate these events to the delegate or to request input or approval from the delegate. For example, when a user presses on a table view cell, the table view object sends the did select cell at index path message to its delegate, and this gives the delegate function or the delegate the opportunity to process the event and perform the specified logic, like triggering a segue or something that you define. That all being said is going to make it very much easier for you to understand what we're going to do later in this tutorial. And please go ahead, if you want to follow along, download the already existing files in the video description below and open up that project. So in the last tutorial, we created this amazing data manager class that allows us to write data from a model object directly to disk and also load that again. And today we're going to create a user interface for our to-do application that isn't fancy yet. We're going to take care of that in another video. But for now, let's open up the main storyboard and first of all remove the already existing view controller, because we are going to need a table view controller right here. So in my object library here in the lower right corner, I'm typing TableViewController, and this is what we're going to need. And this TableViewController needs a navigation bar so that we have some place to add a few buttons. So I'm hitting Editor, Embed in Navigation Controller, and this is going to give us a navigation bar here at the top. And then, very important is to select this navigation controller, open up the Attributes Inspector, and target or mark this as the initial view controller. If we do not do this, then we get a blank screen. So the initial view controller is always indicated with this arrow to the left of a view controller. And now we have our table view controller. We can double click here at the top somewhere, or we actually cannot, so we have to go into the attributes inspector here and maybe write to-do list right here. This is just a heading for our application. And then I'd like to add a bar button item. So I'm typing barboo into the lower right corner here into my object library, and then I'm using this bar button item, and I'm selecting the system item style add right here so that we can actually add to-do items using the user interface. And what I'd also like to do is configuring my table view cell here a little so that we have indeed a custom table view cell, and I'm going to set the row height maybe to 70, and I'm also going to select the table view here and select the row height not to automatic, so I'm unchecking this box and setting the row height to 70 so that we always have a row height of 70. And again, I'm selecting my table view cell here, going to the attributes inspector and giving it a reuse identifier so that we can actually initialize our cell's property and that the system can reuse each and every cell. And what I'd like to add here are three things actually. First of all, I'd like to add a label that takes the whole width of the cell, and this is the to-do item, and we're going to replace that with the item title later on. And then I'd like to add two buttons, buttons here like that. So the first one is going to be completed or complete, and the second one, just copy and paste that right here, is going to be delete, so that you also get to know how to actually create custom table view cells. So this is going to be delete, and I'm going to change that text color to red. I'm going to change that to something like this green. And then we have our items here a little bit more to the top. This one maybe, this also a little bit up. And then we're good to go. So now that I've placed these items right here, I'd like to set their auto resizing mask so that they're always correctly positioned whatever device we're using. And I do not have to work with auto layout constraints here. Using auto resizing masks here in our size inspector completely suffices for that. So I'm selecting now my to-do item label, and I want this to stretch in width, so I also have to pin it to the top, to the left, and to the right, and activate the horizontal arrow here. And as you can see in this representation, we're actually stretching in width. And the auto resizing mask for my lower right button is going to be not pinned to the top, but to the left and to the bottom, which always positions it in the lower left corner. And let's do the same thing for the right button. This positions our button always in the lower right corner. So really cool, and that's all we need to do. So now we need, since this is a custom table view cell, we also need a class that represents this custom table view cell. So I'm removing my view controller class right now, move it to the trash, create an app delegate here, pressing Command N on the keyboard, selecting ToDo Touch class. I'm going to call it ToDo. And now this is not going to be a subclass of NSObject, but UITableViewCell. And notice how Xcode autocompletes this class name for us to ToDo TableViewCell. So let's hit next and create. Let's again click on App Delegate, press Command N, create a new ToDo Touch class. And now I also want to create a ToDo TableViewController. So again, a subclass of UITableViewController, and Xcode autocompletes my file name to that, or my class name, hit next, and create. And because I've always selected app delegate, the files are actually positioned right below app delegate because I've selected and then created a new file. So now we have our ToDo TableViewCell Swift class, and we have the TableViewController Swift class, so I can go back to my main storyboard. First of all, let's select the TableViewController, hit the identity inspector right here. Let's now enter the file name here, or the class name, ToDo TableViewController, and these are connected. Let's now choose the cell, select the cell here, and in the identity inspector, let's add a custom class of ToDo TableViewCell right now. So that's all there is to connect these items with their proper classes. And now I'm selecting the cell again, and I'm opening up the assistant editor here in the top right corner. And now that this automatic is selected here, I actually should be able to get two files to select. Let me just quickly try that again. Automatic, and it does not work. So let me just select the complete button here. And now I get, when I select automatic, I get the ToDo TableViewController as an option, and I get the ToDo TableViewCell. And I like to start with the cell here and actually create an outlet for my to-do label. So let's create that label here. Let's call it to-do label, and that's it. This is the only outlet that we actually need for our custom class, but I'd like to add two functions here. So first of all, for completed, I'd like to add a function complete to do. This is an action, so hit connect. And I also want a function for delete, so delete to do. Also, this is not an outlet, but an action, and connect. And with that, we have two functions that are later going to request a delete, and we're going to use a delegate for that. And this is because many people need to know how delegation works, so I'm going to show you today how you can actually use delegation between different classes. So now that this is in place, let's move to our to-do TableViewController again. And if you followed along the last tutorial, then you've already created some to-do items with this app. If not, that doesn't matter, but I'm going to implement the load data function now first here in my TableViewController, because then we're going to be able to see something. So I'm going to create, first of all, a to-do items array here right at the top of my class. So this is going to be an array of to-do items. I'm not going to initialize that right here, but I'm going to define it. And below view.load, I'm going to create a load data function. We're going to implement that in a second, but first of all, let's remove all of the stuff in view.load and call the load data function. And in the load data function, I'd like to do three things. First of all, I'd like to initialize my to-do items array. So to-do items, and I'm going to use now an array of to-do items or of to-do item and initialize that directly here. Then the next step is going to be, then I'd like to sort the elements that I get from my data manager. And you're going to see a pretty neat trick to do that right now. So let's use the to-do items array and actually use now the data manager that we created in the last video. And I'm now going to call the load all function. And what I'd like to load here is all to-do items that we have. So all I have to pass along here is the to-do item type. So I'm using to-do item and self to just pass along the type. And now I get an unsorted result of all of the files and all of the objects that we've stored on disk. But now I'd like to sort that. And therefore, since this is a collection type, I can actually just call the Swift sorted function. And now I can sort that by something. And here I'm just passing along a closure that does all the work for me. And I'm now accessing the first element here that we have. And I'm going to use the created at property of our element. And I'm going to compare that with the second element in our collection and also access the created at property. And by that, it is automatically sorted and we have an array sorted of our to-do items. So pretty cool. And the last thing that I need to do is using my table view and reload the data, because now we have data, or every time we actually call this function, we'd actually like to get the representation back into our TableViewController. And with that said, we also need to configure our TableViewController. So the number of sections that we're going to have are 1. So I'm going to remove this warning here. This is the number of sections. As for the number of rows in the section, we're going to use our to-do items array and just count that to get the proper number here. And the last and most important function here is self-row at index path, where we create a table view cell or we dequeue the reusable cells. We have to pass along the correct identifier here, which is in our case cell. And then I'm going to cast the table view cell that we get here, which is a UITableViewCell. I'm going to cast that ToDo TableViewCell, which gives us the opportunity to actually call cell and to-do label and text and set this to a specific string. And the string we get from our to-do items array. So let me create a to-do item right here. And to access the correct item, I'm using the to-do items array, access it with brackets here, and to get the index, I'm using index path .row to always get the correct element from my to-do item list. And then all I need to do here for our text is to use to-do item and the title of this object. Let's quickly build and run this application in the simulator and see what happens. So here we are. And indeed, we have the two elements we got from the last tutorial, which is do next tutorial and read news. Now, if you haven't followed along the last tutorial, you should see no element at all. So you might be interested in giving some life to this plus button in the top right corner, which is exactly what we're going to do now. So I'm selecting that one, opening up the assistant editor here in the top right corner, and pressing Control on the keyboard, dragging to my assistant editor, and now this is going to be add new to do, and this is going to be an action. And to create such a new to do item, we're going to use an alert view for that, or an alert controller, and I've actually already prepared that code for that so that we do not have to do that right now, since it's really, really simple. So what we're doing is just creating an UI alert controller object with the title new to do, a little message, and a text field that holds a placeholder for to do item title with two buttons, create and cancel, and then we present this alert controller to the user. And the actual magic here in this alert controller happens in this first UI alert action, which is for the create button. And I'm simply adding this code now here to this closure, to this code block. And what we'd like to do here, first of all, is getting a title, then creating a new to-do item, a new to-do object from our data model, and then save it and also put it into our table view. So first of all, let's use a guard let statement here for the title, using the add alert object and its text fields array and the first object and the text. And this gets us the text from the text field. And if this does not work, we simply return here because then there's nothing that we can do, because then we cannot create an to-do item. So now that we have a to-do item, that we know that we have one in the next line, you can create a new to-do. So I'm initializing that with a to-do item, as you know, with the title, completed, created at, and so on. So the title is going to be title. Completed is first of all going to be false. Created at, I'm just using the current date. And for the identifier, I'm just using the initialization of UUID. And we have a new to-do item. And all we need to do to actually save that to disk, because we have this cool data manager, is using the new to-do and hit the save item function, and that's it. And now what we could actually do is just call the load data function, and this would actually load the newly created file and update the TableViewController, but this isn't always so nice because it has no animation and we have to reload everything, and that's really not necessary. So what we can do instead is using our to-do items array, and first of all append this a new to-do item there so that we have that and can work with in the future. And the last thing that we have to do is actually inserting that item into the table view, which is really simple. We first of all have to create an index path for the location in our table view by actually just creating an index path here, initialize that with a row and a section. So the row is going to be our table view, self table view, and it's a number of rows in section 0, so the first section. Since we're only dealing with one section here, we can just pass along 0 here, and also again in this section 0 again, because we know that we only are working with one section here. And then last step, self table view, and then insert rows at index path array. So we are passing along our one index path here in array with a automatic animation, and that's all there is to it. So we just insert a new row, and this triggers a reload of self row at index path, and then it accesses the last index path that we now have, and by that creates a new to-do item. So let's see how this works and if that works. So in the simulator now, I'm hitting the plus icon. We get our new alert controller. I have a new to-do. Let me just create that way. Hit create. And indeed, we get a new to-do at the bottom with a nice little animation. That's so cool. So very easy. And now let's move on. So what we still need is a way to delete and also mark our to-do items as completed. So as I've promised, we're going to create that feature by actually using delegation. We could also do another or take another approach, but I think this works just fine for us right here. So I've opened up my to-do table view cell right here. And delegation is great because it enables you to communicate actually between different classes. So what I'd like to do now here is for a delegate, we need a protocol, and a protocol actually just defines a set of functions that need to be implemented. This is not so much, this was also available in Objective-C. So you might already know this design pattern or this technique in iOS development, but it has not so much to do with protocol-oriented programming. You might expect another tutorial on that in the future. So we define a protocol now, and I'm going to call that ToDoCell Delegate. And this protocol needs to implement two functions. The first one is going to be did request delete. And it's going to have one parameter, which is a to-do table view cell. And we're going to have another function, which is going to be did request complete. And again, one parameter, which is the to-do table view cell. Now, for delegation to work, what we need in our class, notice that we have defined this protocol outside of our to-do table view cell. And what we need now for this to work is to define a delegate object or a delegate property in our class ToDoTableViewCell. And this property needs to be of type ToDoCellDelegate. And it's going to be optional because what we'd like to check now in complete to-do and in delete to-do is to check if we have such a delegate function and if this delegate object was set. So I'm creating an if-let statement here and call this object delegate object maybe, and then I'm using just self delegate here. And if we have such a delegate object, then what we can do is use this delegate object and call the function did request complete in that case. And what we'd like to pass to this function is self. So exactly the cell that we're currently working with. And we're going to do the same thing right here in delete to do, so I'm just copying and paste that right here. We're checking if we have a delegate object, and if we have one, then we use the delegate object and call did request delete and pass along self, so that we can work with this cell later when we've implemented these delegate functions in our ToDoTableViewController. And as with other delegates that we're dealing with when using, for example, a table view or a scroll view, we have to adopt now this protocol right here at the top when we define our ToDoTableViewController class. And I'm now adding a comma here and just use the ToDoTableViewCell Delegate, or what did I call it? I called it ToDoCell Delegate. So this is what I'm going to adopt right here. And this should give us an error message because we do not conform to this protocol yet. So what we need is to fix this and actually implement these two functions. And I'm going to cut these from the top and maybe add them right below our add new to do function right here. And if we, or if this did request delete function was triggered by clicking or pressing on the delete button in our cell, then what we need to do is figuring out which cell was actually pressed. Therefore, we have our cell parameter here in this function's parameter list. And then we need to create an index path from this cell. So we're creating an if-let statement here to check if we can get such an index path using our table view, and call the function index path for cell. So with that, we can get the index path of the cell that we clicked, or where we clicked the delete button. And with that index path, we can now, first of all, delete the item from our documents directory. So I'm using the to-do items array, access the correct element using index path and row, and just hit the delete item function. With that, it's removed from the disk. Now, I'd also need to use the to-do items and remove the exact to-do item from our to-do items array so that we don't have that in memory any longer. So I'm removing that at indexPath.row. And the last thing that I need to do is remove it from the table view. So I'm using my table view, and just call delete rows, add an array of index paths, we just have one, and use an automatic animation here. As simple as that. This is the delete function, or the implementation of this did request delete delegate function that we have. And the last thing that we need to implement is here did request delete, or not did request delete, did request complete. And therefore, I'm again creating an index path using table view and index path for cell. And with that index path, I can now access a to-do item. So I'm creating a to-do item here, accessing the to-do items with the index path and its row. And then I can just use this to-do item and mark it as completed. And by that, it automatically gets saved because we have said so in the last tutorial. So we have this mark as completed function. We set completed to true, and then we save it using our data manager. And let's get back here. And the last thing that we might want to do here is actually creating a visual representation of the if our to-do item is indeed completed, and therefore I have created a little strike-through text function that is pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to explain much here. All we really need to do is go here into our did request complete function again and use our cell, the to-do label, and then access the attributed text, because this is now an attributed text because we create this strike through, and then I'm calling my strike through text here, and just pass along the to-do item and its title to set the correct text here. And then, because we now have such a visual representation, we're also going into our cell for row at index path function right here, and we need to do two things here. First of all, at the bottom, let's add if to-do item is completed. Then we want to use the cell, the to-do label, and its attributed text, and again use the strike through text function, use the to-do item and its title to actually also strike through when we load something into the table view. And for our delegate to work, what we also need to do is using our cell and use the delegate property of this cell and set this to self. So this is very usual if you're working with delegates. We're setting this to self because we have adopted the to-do cell delegate. By that we can now access the delegate functions did request delete and did request complete. And if we set the delegate to self, then our cell knows that we actually need to trigger the functions in the class that we're currently in. So we're using our to-do TableViewController class here to get these two functions triggered. And with that done, we can run this in the simulator and see if that works and if we can complete our to-do items. So I have completed this tutorial, so I can hit complete, and this is indeed now done. So let me just run this again in the simulator and see if it is still marked as completed. Okay, that's great. And a new to-do, I do not need this any longer, so I hit delete, and it has this nice animation, got deleted. Let's run this again in the simulator and see if it is still deleted. And it indeed is, so we have done everything right. You have seen in this tutorial how easy it is now with our data manager to actually implement such a simple to-do application. We have also used delegation, and you've seen how to implement delegation in this with this practical approach right here for what we needed to do here, because we have added these two buttons to our TableView cell, and by that we have also created actions for these buttons in the specific TableViewCell class, which is complete to do and delete to do. And by using delegation, we were able to use the ToDo TableViewController to still process that by implementing these delegate functions that we have created. So I hope you have enjoyed this video so far. If yes, then give it a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to this channel to not miss any videos also in this 24 days of iOS tutorials or Swift tutorials series. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.